Well, hey there, it's your old pal Keith from Wavetables.lol. That's Wavetables.lol, home of KRC Math Waves, the world's largest collection of wavetables, single-cycle waveforms, and even some samples for all sorts of modern synthesizers. And that is also the home of Liminal Space 2, the new version of my haunted digital reverb, now called a haunted digital reverb synthesizer, because Liminal Space 2 adds many new and unusual features to Liminal Space, which is an unabashedly digital reverb, but is capable of doing a lot of different sounds. This is a thing I've been working on for a little while now. The original version of Liminal Space, which I guess we have to call Liminal Space 1 now, came out about a year ago. It is still, even in Liminal Space 2, a Windows-only plugin. It's Windows Clap and VST3. There will be a Mac version in the future. And part of the reason that I've been working on Liminal Space 2 is I wanted to get the code base. That's so pretty, right? Cool. It's so pretty. I wanted to get the code base into a state where it was ready to be ported to Mac, and that required quite a bit of work. The other thing is Liminal Space 1 actually, had some, let's listen to some other presets. This is called cassette. You can hear that pitch warbling in the background. I wanted to get this into a state where it could be ported to Mac, and our friend of the channel, Seth Watson, over at Fine Increments, is very interested in getting this on Mac, and so he's going to help out because he's a Mac guy. But there was a lot of work that I had to do, and as I was working on kind of refactoring the code base and adding some features that users had requested, like some lock buttons for the master output, and no one asked for this, but I thought there should be a lock on the way the algorithm is processed, et cetera, et cetera. I found some kind of bugs, and I found some like suboptimal behavior in the in some of the processing modules, and so once things got to a point where it wasn't bit compatible with Liminal Space 1 anymore, I was just like, you know what, we're just going to package this as Liminal Space 2. The cool thing about Liminal Space 2, if you are a Windows Clap or VST3 user, you can play along at home because there's now a demo version. You'll see I am running the demo version. I'm taking a page out of the audio damage playbook here, and the demo version of Liminal Space runs for 20 minutes at a time. It's just save disabled, but it's fully functional. So it comes with all the factory presets, which I'm still working on, by the way. There's going to be a lot more presets here. But it doesn't support user presets. So if you want to be able to program and save this reverb synthesizer, you need to buy it. But the full version of Liminal Space is just $10. This product page will be updated soon. I've already updated the text about Liminal Space 2. So hey, links in the description. Go check it out and try it with me. We'll talk about the full interface, like what's new here. I know that for most people this is new. Like not many people probably saw, even though I had hours of video about Liminal Space 1. We'll talk about all the features. We'll talk about some of the unique things it does. There's a bunch of new stuff, like this kind of display is new, where we can see the wavetable and we can see the phase going through it, etc. A bunch of different options you have for messing with the wavetables. Some new features like a diffusion matrix. So there is a true diffusion feature. Let's maybe turn this up a little bit. Modulatable diffusion, by the way. Oh, and Shimmer. Let's see. Is there a good Shimmer verb? Yeah. So, Liminal Space has really gone far beyond, there's the Shimmer module, has gone far beyond what was possible in Liminal Space 1. And we'll talk about that more. The first thing I'm going to do is get out of the demo mode. The demo has abandonment issues by now. Oh, that's so cute. I am so clever. Let's show you what installation is like, because there is one like small gotcha to installation. Oh, the old version of Liminal Space didn't have a proper installer, but Liminal Space 2 has a proper installer, but it is currently unsigned because I am not, I don't develop a lot of plugins. Liminal Space was my first plugin. Liminal Space 2 will be my second plugin, and I haven't bothered with the whole authentication chain thing. So both the demo and the full version do have an installer, but Windows SmartScreen will intercept it. So once you download the installer for Liminal Space 2, either the demo or the full version, you just double click it to run it. Now, because it's unsigned, Windows will give you the Windows protected your PC error. This is Windows SmartScreen. Just to continue installation, just go more info and then run anyway. This file is from me. It is not a virus. You can run it. Run it, and then we can install either the clap version or the VST version. Of course, you have to install the archetypes, presets, and algorithms, blah, blah. And then just click next. It'll install it. I install Liminal Space to the default clap and VST3 locations under Windows. Okay, you don't get a choice there right now. Let me know if that's an issue for you, because I am calling this release candidate 1. There are probably bugs. I have tested this. Obviously, you can see it works in Bitwig. I've tested in Reaper, FL Studio, MPC3 software this works in. And what else? Oh, Vegas, a couple other things. What are the, it works in Ableton Live. But your mileage may vary. Please report any bugs to me and I will fix them as soon as I can. Okay, so now we are in the full version of Liminal Space 2. Don't mind the bells. I usually use patches like this. This is a multi-poly native here, running a kind of a polygonal wavetable, because these make it very clear what's going on with the reverb. By the way, I have a full library of multi-poly patches. You can go get that at wavetables.lol. Links in the description. Let's kind of walk through the basics of Liminal Space 2, because it does have some unusual features. The first thing you'll note at the top of the interface is this thing called archetypes. And an archetype is kind of the old notion of a preset. This is the init patch. This is kind of the pure sound of the reverb tank inside of Liminal Space 2. There's no delay modulation. There's no diffusion matrix stuff. There's no shimmer going on. And it has a beautiful sound, but it's a little bit static. The core DSP here comes actually from Airwindows. If you're not familiar with Airwindows, do I have Airwindows up here? Airwindows is a guy named Chris Johnson, who has been a long-time experimenter in DSP and comes up with some really crazy ideas. And he's been doing things with reverbs that are powered by a feedback delay network called a householder matrix. And householder matrices are kind of interesting because they can do things like they can even go infinite. So, one of the main ways that you control the length of the reverb in Liminal Space 2 is this regeneration slider. So we can go from very short well, that's not very short, but you get the idea, to very long, but just by dragging this slider out. And they'll even go infinite. So if we set this to 100%, this reverb will just continue forever and ever. So, you know, there's an archetype for infinite. This sounds very much like the original kCosmos, but there is some delay modulation on it that you can hear. So it's chorusy, but it's a chorusy reverb that will go infinitely. So that's kind of how you can control the length of a reverb on a very basic basis. Basic basis? There's also a scale parameter. So the scale parameter adjusts the sizes of the delay lines relative to the currently loaded algorithm. We'll get to algorithms in a second. And you'll hear that this builds up a little faster as we move the scale down. And there's kind of a short reverb, right? So we can make this really short by doing this. Is that a room? I don't know. Maybe that's a room type of reverb. Let's go back to loading the init patch. So, you know, when I was doing Liminal Space 1, that started as a riff on kCosmos. And the interesting thing about kCosmos is, in addition to this householder matrix core, you could theoretically change the algorithms. And so Chris's original algorithm for kCosmos and its brother and sister reverbs only feature like one algorithm, but I went and computed a bunch of different algorithms. Now, algorithms are basically just the lengths of the delay lines, and there are many collections of algorithms inside of this bank parameter. You can scroll through them. The main one is called Lex1. That's obviously kind of a reference to Lexicon, because I feel like the core sound of this digital reverb is very much like the Lexicon 224 and other famous Lexicon reverbs, just without all the modulation stuff. And by changing the algorithm, we can change slightly the fundamental sound. You can hear that this one's like a little deeper than the original one. This one's got a little bit of bloom to it. And this is all because the algorithms all have different delay lengths, but these were actually computed using a genetic algorithm. Now, it's not the same one that Chris used for his householder matrix reverbs. I looked at his code for like breeding algorithms, and it didn't make a lot of sense to me, and I didn't think it was really grounded in acoustic principles. So I rewrote that and also rewrote it so it could run on GPUs. And so I used a whole bunch of cloud resources, you know, like Google Colab, to like run this on giant like machine language training GPUs to come up with these different algorithms. So you can see in the different banks, you can hear they're very different. So like the B bank, Lex 2, has more like blooms. These reverbs take a longer time to build up. They have more complex delay tails. And this kind of reminds me of things like the old Alesis, you know, MIDIverb 2 and MIDIverb 3, kind of non-linear reverb algorithms. And there's just a whole bunch of different ones. The cathedral ones take a very long time to build up, so they kind of have built-in pre-delay. I could talk about this for a really long time. The point of all of this is kind of trying to explain like how this works. And you know, there's more than 2,000 algorithms in here that range from these like very long ones to things that are like ambient, not ambient like ambient music long, but ambience reverbs, like very short. So these are designed for, you could even take the scale down, take the regen down. They're like very, very short. And so they're just like roomy type things, right? And so the reason there are archetypes is an archetype like helps you dial in a given sound. And there will probably be more archetypes in the finished version of Liminal Space 2. In RC1, there are, I think, 29-ish algorithms that range from the init to classics like cassette, which is a pitch-shifted tail thing. We'll talk about that. And also it's derezed. There's some new ones, like Cathedral Air, which is a very, very clear, long reverb. Listen to this. And speaking of derez, like we can take derez down and you'll hear that the pitch of this reverb goes down. And there is an effect that's a little like bit crushing, but it's really a frequency effect. We're changing the rate at which the reverb samples. And so we can get these darker tones. And as I move it, you'll hear the pitch change. And we can even modulate that. So a core feature of Liminal Space 2, and why I call it haunted, is that we've got these wavetable LFOs all over the place that we can use to modulate different things. And one of them is Derez. So here we have just the default sine to triangle wavetable loaded. You see that this, as we move the wavetable position, goes from a sine wave to a triangle wave. Let's leave it at a sine wave, and let's change its rate. Let's see, let's do that, and let's bring its depth up. And what you'll hear it doing is you'll hear it modulating the derez parameter. And we can even get crazy with that. Like if we just put in, I don't know, there's a noise format here. This is a very, very warbly thing. Very weird and seasick, right? Let's turn this up. But maybe that's too fast for you. So here's like another feature that I put in. There's this new shape parameter for the wavetable LFOs, which can turn it into a stepped LFO. And now we'll hear it in kind of a sample and hold type of configuration, right? I'm going to turn depth way up to like an unusable amount. This will sound very, very strange. And there's even a slew parameter if we want to like make the transitions more gentle, but still keep that step nature. And we can change the number of steps. And again, if I click shape again, this will go back. And that's almost unusable. You can hear this makes like distortion because it's too noisy, that change. But if we change it back to stepped, so there's lots of different weird effects you can do here. And this wasn't part of the original kCosmos, and Crunchcoat, I think, is the other reverb of Chris's that did this originally. There's also an LFO phase parameter here, so you can modulate the derez on the left and the right channels independently by moving this. And if we move this like up to 180, what's going to happen is, or 180-ish, what's going to happen is the left and right channels are being modulated in the opposite direction with the derez. And so we won't hear that pitch changes strongly. The channels are kind of combined, and so we kind of hear them as more like a chorusing. And we can use depths that if the LFO phases were synced, would sound kind of seasick. So that's kind of the basic concept behind archetypes like cassette. That's what it's doing. It's modulating the Derez in that way. There's a whole bunch of other things. I guess we need to get to some of the other features of Liminal Space too. But I'm going to take a short break, and then we will continue. Hey there, like and subscribe for more talky synthesizer content. You know, I should have made this clear. Liminal Space 2 is a free update for anyone who owns the original version of Liminal Space. You'll find it in your Gumroad account. Just go to your Gumroad library and go to the Liminal Space page, and you will see the RC1 installer for Liminal Space 2. Okay? I'm cool like that. I'm going to stay with this bell patch because I want to show you the other modules that are in Liminal Space. So we're going to go back to our init patch. There is a bypass now, so this is a hot bypass. If we turn this on, processing continues, but we won't hear the output of the reverb. So that's our original patch. I've taken any chorus, I've taken any delay off of it. So there it is without the reverb, and here it is with Liminal Space 2 on it. You know, I did a lot of CPU optimization on this plugin going into version 2. And I just want to check, did I? Yes, I don't have my preview enabled. So that's the basic sound of Liminal Space, right? Now, let's go through the different modules. There's a tabbed interface in Liminal Space 1. Boy, poppy. Let's move our lav mic. It wouldn't be a Keith video if I did not adjust my lav mic. All right. So there's like a tabbed interface. The Liminal Space 1 was kind of just this scrolling list of parameters. Things are sufficiently complex now that we've turned it into a tabbed interface. We talked about Derez, right? So Derez changes the overall pitch and the top frequency of the reverb. But there's other sections as well. So we've also got early reflections. Now the early reflections are the things that excite the tank. And this is more or less always on. You can adjust the level of the early reflections that get mixed into the reverb tail. So if you slide this all the way down, you'll see this little indicator light went off. That indicates that we're not hearing any of the early reflections. We're only hearing the long tail. If we bring this back up to the default, I can control click, actually. I'm holding down control and clicking, and that will return any given control to its quote-unquote default. Now we've got the early reflections back in. There are, just like in Liminal Space 1, there is a default mode, which is the kCosmos original configuration of the early reflections delay lines. But you can also select the short, medium, or long options here. Short selects the shortest delay lines to be the early reflections. And I don't know that you can really hear a lot of difference here. This is very subtle. I'm turning that up. I turned the early reflections volume up. Median this is like the median set of 5 delays. This does change the apparent space that the reverb is in. Or we can go with the longest set of delays for our early reflections. And there is a pre-delay, so if we want to change the onset of the reverb, let's change that back to default. I'm going to change pre-delay back to about 0. So that's your early reflections section. We'll change the early reflections back to 50% again. There's also a filter. So there's a filter between the early reflections and the reverb tank, and by default it's at 50%. It gives you this kind of middling dark kind of reverb. If I move this up, there will be more and more high frequency content that gets into the tank. And now you can really hear the high-end shimmer. I mean, it's shimmer-like, right? Excuse me. Boy, it must be drink time. That's your early reflections module. And then keep in mind, all of these modules, they're not so much in series as they all kind of work together. So the next section that we have that can really increase the richness of the reverb that comes out of Liminal Space 2 is the delay modulator. Now, the delay mod in Liminal Space 1 was labeled as delay/diffusion mod. And its intent was, in fact, to create diffusion and also Doppler shift kind of effects. It does not work right, it turns out. There were some kind of boneheaded bugs in there. It does have a certain sound. It kind of lends an amplitude modulation to things. It has an effect, but it did not have the desired effect. So one of the biggest changes in Liminal Space 2 is delay mod now does what it's supposed to do. And what it does is it changes the lengths of the delay. So it's almost like the tank is changing dimensions. And this can be subtle or extreme. Let's turn this on so we can hear it. So here it is without any delay modulation. Okay, that kind of static tail. We're listening to the tail now. If I turn up the rate of modulation and then give it some depth, so I'm going to go pretty subtle here. You can hear that now there's a little bit of like a chorusing or phasing effect in the tail. And you can really hear it when I turn depth up. Hear that? And I could turn the rate down and we'll get a very gentle kind of effect. It's very pretty, yeah? So depth kind of, works together with rate to give you different sorts of effects. And the shape of the waveform also makes a difference. All of our LFOs, including the dedicated LFOs, are wavetables, of course, as befits something I would do. You've got things that are sine wave-like, but that have little jiggity-jaggities in them. And this can be interesting with delay mod. That's a very complex kind of chorusy sound that's going on, right? I'm not going to belabor this too much, but you can do all sorts of interesting things playing around with this. So depth off. And then depth, whoa, way up. And that'll start to get unusable. And you also hear like a little bit of digital noise that creeps into there, which may or may not be desirable. There is also in most of the modules, there's a concept of phase spread and depth spread. So there are 20 different delay lines whose size is being modulated here. If we read the Wavetable LFO from the same position all the time, and you'll see that a new thing here in Liminal Space 2 is that the Wavetable displays now have a phase angle. And so this is showing you the master phase, the main phase, that all of the associated LFOs will follow in this module. So by default, the phase spread is all the way up, meaning that we take all those 20 delays and we stagger the phase at which we are reading the wavetable so that they're not all in sync. And so that gives us these nice kind of rich chorusy sounds. But if we wanted to change this to more of a pitch warble, we could move phase spread down and we can put all those wavetable LFOs in sync, and this will be a distinctly different sound. Let's change this back to a sine wave. And I'm going to move depth way up. So that's another way that you can get what I call this haunted effect in Liminal Space. fat fingers. That's kind of interesting. I mean, it's sort of like a guitar twang kind of thing. But the general idea is that phase spread should be up like this. But, you can bring the phases of the LFOs closer together. And so we can kind of mix and match. The other spread idea that's in liminal space is the idea of depth spread. So, we've got this depth, we're modulating these delays by 13.58%. And each one is at the same depth. But if we increase depth spread, what we do is we shorten the modulation on the shorter delays and we lengthen it on the longer delays, and this gives us a distinctly different effect. It's less radical now, right? Because there's some depth over the range of the different delay lines. And let's move phase spread all the way up. And actually, what depth does is it shortens the shorter lines and it lengthens the longer lines with respect to depth. So if I move depth down and move depth spread all the way up, that's a very pretty sound, right? There's also tap percentage. So by default, every tap is going to be modulated by the Wavetable LFO, but we can change the taps that are being modulated to a different percentage. So we can take an arbitrary, like 80% of them, 60, 40, 20%. So this is only a small number of taps. And so we'll only hear, let's turn phase spread all the way down. Let's just change depth. We'll only hear a couple of the delay taps being modulated. As I move that up, we'll get more and more chorusing. Or pitch shift. There, see when we reach 60, we can really hear it. The other thing we can do is we can select them by length. So we can say only do the 80% of the shortest delays. Whoa. Let's see. Or we can use the arrow keys to go. Let's do 20% short. And so now, there's only a little bit of that wild pitch modulation. And so this is, more like a diffusion kind of effect, right? It's all very subtle, and you'll really need good headphones or good speakers to hear what I'm doing. But I think even on crappy speakers, you can probably hear the effect of this. I do sometimes like to select a smaller number from the long delays. So let's do like 60% of the longest delays. And see, now the shorter ones, they're not being delay modulated. You only hear these kind of Doppler shifts in the long tail. And of course, it's too extreme, and it's C6, so we move the depth down. There's also a clear delays button, by the way. This immediately dumps the contents of the delays so that you can just stop the reverb. And so this is useful for comparing different settings, right? So let's change our depth just a little bit up. Maybe we'll change our rate a little bit up. That's a really nice chorused tail. And then you'll hear it very strongly now. And you'll hear it less if we dial this back to the 20% low. Where's 20% low? There you are. Okay, so that's the concept with delay mod. We'll actually come back to delay mod because there's a very interesting thing in the Lexicon 224 in how the delays are modulated in what's called the mode enhancement. And there's a hidden control underneath the main panel that allowed you to do these kind of chorusy effects. And it's very interesting how that's done, and we can emulate that here, but we got to move on to the diffusion matrix. So let's just select a nice amount here of delay mod. That's a little too much. So there's a diffusion matrix now in Liminal Space 2. That's not present in Liminal Space 1. And I was partly inspired to add diffusion to the core householder idea by the work of Sean Costello at Valhalla. You're probably familiar with all of Valhalla's reverbs, which are actually fantastic. And there's a lot of ideas, really, in Liminal Space that are a lot like Valhalla Supermassive in a way, right? It's like a network of delays, and it becomes a reverb. But another thing we can do to add dimension to a delay is to use diffusion. And so diffusion basically adds a set of all-pass delays, which like F with the phase of the incoming signals, and there's two places in the reverb where this can be done. So get your words right, Keith. Under the route control, we can put diffusion on the early reflections going into the tank, and then there's a diffuser on the tank itself, or we can do both. And let's select both because that's easiest to hear. I'm gonna mute this real quick. So here's just our delay mod, and I'm gonna turn the diffusion matrix on. You can hear it's a subtly different sound. Feedback spread, in this case, actually alternates between more of a symmetrical all-pass diffusion and a more kind of alternating diffusion. And these have subtly different sounds. With FB spread all the way up, the diffusion sort of sounds vocal. And there are controls for the amount of diffusion. So if we just want a little bit, we can put this control down here. Or if we want a lot, we can move it up. This basically changes the size at which the all-pass delays can be modulated. And then, sorry, it's not really the size, it's the amount, and then size controls like the amount of length that we're allowed to modulate them. I'm going to mute this again. So there's just with the delay mod. Here's with the diffusion matrix in. Now, just like this, without any modulation, you don't hear the diffusion very much, but of course there's a dedicated wavetable LFO that's right here. And so if we just give this some rate and give it some diffusion, just like in the delay mod, we will now be changing the time that the different read heads are reading the diffusion. And now you really hear it. And just like with delay mod, if I move the depth of this parameter up, you'll start to hear Doppler-ing, but it's a different type of pitch shift, right? It's at different places in the reverb. And so together, these two things can give us very rich chorus stuff. I kind of jumped ahead, right? And I pointed out that there's mute and solo buttons here, but I didn't talk about what they do. I found, even though this kind of raises the complexity of the GUI, that it was kind of useful when programming this reverb to be able to solo just the different parts, right? So here's just the diffusion matrix, and now this is going to basically mute the effect of the delay mod. So there's just the diffusion. If I turn that off and instead solo delay mod, now we'll hear just the delay mod. You can hear they're kind of similar. And if I turn off solo, now I've got them together. That's like two great Doppler shifts that sound great together. You got your chocolate and my peanut butter. In terms of how this the diffusion modulation works, oh, here, let's turn it way up like that. Actually, let's a little bit slower. Okay, now we can really hear that something's going on. There's this thing called a control grid, and the control grid can either smoothly morph the modulation, or we can set just a certain number of control points, so we can kind of quantize it. So if we go down to 4, like now the delay shifts are quantized, and it gives a distinctly different effect. It's a little bit lo-fi. Turn that way up. So you can hear that's quite a bit different. Maybe that's enough about the diffusion matrix for now, right? I'm going to dial this down a little bit, the depth of this modulation. So it's a little more sane. But you can see that the liminal space is like, it's a reverb that lets you dig in under the hood. Maybe not quite in the way of something like Melda. But if you've ever wanted to really get into a reverb and tweak its parameters, well, Liminal Space 2 is for you. The last thing I want to say about diffusion, the ideas of both Sean Costello from Valhalla and also Tom Erbe of Soundhack, creator of the Erbe Verb, which was a Eurorack module that does reverb. He had a great presentation. There'll be links in the description to some of my favorite things from those creators. But thanks to Sean and to Mr. Erbe for sharing their... Whoa, Poppy again! For sharing their knowledge about reverb. Okay, moving on. There's so many features in liminal space. There are now 3 modulation LFOs, as if the dedicated modulation LFOs were not enough. If we wanted to give more complexity, say, to like our delay modulation, like maybe we want to like dynamically change this rate. Let's turn the def back up. If we wanted to, give a little more, even more depth to this, we can take a mod LFO and we can assign it to like all sorts of different destinations inside the reverb. So for example, we could go to the delay modulation and we could target rate. And now if we give this guy some rate and some depth, you will see that we now have a little, can you see this targeting reticle? It's almost like a targeting reticle. I'm going to turn depth like way up. And so now you'll see that we are modulating the rate of the delay mod LFO with mod LFO 1. And another thing you see is there's little badges here to show you that modulation is happening. So delay mod, this little badge that says M1 means that mod LFO 1 is targeting something inside here. And you can see it 1 by the animation, but you can also see there's another badge over here on rate. So mod LFO 1 is modulating the rate. Let's listen to this. And I can drag this, and you'll see that the scale changes. The LFO modulation is bipolar right now. I might make a unipolar option. So that just gives us a lot more options for how our delay modulation and how our diffusion would be changing. But we can target a bunch of other things as well. Let's move on. I'm going to change this depth back a little bit. And let's see. Yeah, we're good on the diffusion mod. So they're below the mod LFOs, and there's 3 of them. Each can target its own parameter. There's another section. I want to move to pitch shift. So pitch shift is a feature that worked correctly in Liminal Space 1, and it's a different pitch shift that actually happens in the tank. So this is a 2-head pitch shifter, and I think you'll hear the chorusing effect as we turn this on. There are multiple engines now, and they're not really all pitch shift. They're kind of like FSUs, as I would say, like fuck shit up. But the default one is called Legacy, and it's Legacy Pitch Shift. And by default, its wavetable modulator is a triangle wave. And there's a reason for that, which hopefully I'll remember to talk about. We can get pitch shift into the tank by turning up rate and turning up depth. We'll just choose like a small amount here. And then we also have to turn on our pitch shift mix. So we can turn our pitch shift mix all the way off. There's no pitch shift now. And as I dial this up, you'll see that graph start to move. And I'm going to turn the rate up. Hear that? So now there's like a chorusing, warbling effect that's happening inside the tank. And this pitch shift actually either adds or takes energy out of the tank itself. So you'll hear that as I activate this feature, the length of the reverb actually changes. It becomes shorter because there are cancellations now with this pitch shift modulation on all of the different delay points. It's a very rich and lovely sound. It can also get kind of cranky sounding. Whoa. It's like becoming discordant, right? Because there's too much depth. But you could use that as a special effect. Because this happens recursively inside of the tank, well, super seasick, we can do really weird things with this. So, for example, if we change this wavetable, waveform to be more of a sine wave, what's going to happen is the pitch over time is going to develop an offset, and it's going to drop. And different wavetables will do different things. Different waveforms will have a different effect. But basically, a waveform that spends more time slowing down than it does speeding up will make the pitch drop. So an example of that kind of waveform is the sine wave. And the rate and the depth will change how that evolves over time. I mean, you've probably never heard a reverb do that. Well, maybe you have. But if this is a triangle wave, which is completely symmetrical, like it spends the same amount of time speeding up as it does slowing down, its constant rate would be the way to say that. This will just create like kind of this constant chorusing. And if we take this really high up, we'll start to hear, some noise being introduced. Okay, but I allow you to go outside the bounds of what normal humans would do. It's just a very nice effect. There is a high pass filter in here because doing this kind of thing can cause low frequencies to build up, and it can make the overall reverb very bassy. So we can like high pass that effect. There's also, of course, just like everywhere else, there's the phase spread idea. If we turn phase spread all the way off, you hear that? You can really hear the pitch shifting on the tails because the phase of the wavetable LFO is aligned across all of the taps. Well, fat fingers. So it's fun to experiment with that. But it's really best left probably at 100%. And then if I turn depth down, I can also do the depth spread trick. And so I can shorten the amount of travel on the reed heads. For the shorter delays, I can lengthen it for the long ones. And so I can get a more balanced kind of pitch shifting effect that's more chorusy. And that's very nice right there, isn't it? Let's take it up a little bit extreme. Okay. There's also interpolation. By default, the wavetable modulation on this kind of primitive pitch shifter is a linear interpolation, but there's also a 6-point interpolator built in that's used all over the place internally, and we can turn it on for like slightly different effects. And you might consider that pitch shift to be a smoother. This will mostly have effect when we have a more complex wavetable oscillator. For example, the noisy one. Where's the noise format? Let's turn the rate way down on you. So there it is off, and here it is on. It's a very subtle effect, but you know, try both. And that's very special effecty. I mean, we wouldn't generally use a noise LFO here. But we might change it to one of those slewed ones. Let's change the rate. Whoops, that's the slew. Let's change the rate. That's kind of interesting, yeah? All right, there are a bunch of other engines that I probably won't get into in this video, but these will create other subtler types of motion inside the tank. Tank warp. There's parallel field. You can hear a bassy thing going on there. Doppler pairing. Whoa, that's weird, right? I think that rate needs to come down. That depth needs to come down. I'll talk about these effects more in a future video. There is one more parameter when you're in legacy pitch shift that is worth a note. Because doing this can take energy out of the tank, there is a trim knob for the feedback. And so you heard that, like, let's just turn this off. We'll mute it. So that's the length of our reverb without the in-tank pitch shift. You can hear it's very long. If I turn pitch shift back on by unmuting it, you hear that the length of it is significantly lower now, especially as depth comes up. If I were trying to go for a very long reverb with this kind of in-tank pitch shift, the first thing I would do is I could turn regen up. And now it's going to go really long, and I'm sorry, it's kind of a ridiculous comical effect. But you'll note if I turn this up to like infinite regen, like at 100%, this will still die out. If you wanted to get closer to infinite, you could use this FB trim, feedback trim knob, but it's very dangerous because you can, in fact, throw the matrix like essentially out of unity gain, and it will, you know, quickly feed back. So we've gone longer. If we change the feedback trim, it may not happen with this particular patch. Now we're offsetting the energy that we're taking out. We're getting closer to infinity. But this can start to run away from us in some cases. So this is kind of a danger parameter. I don't really recommend messing with that. If the reverb should start to run away on you, you can click the clear delays button, which will just dump the contents of the delay lines. So you hear that we immediately, you might have to click it multiple times depending on the length. So anyway, that's a little safety tip for you there. And that is pitch shift. Now, in addition to pitch shift, I'm going to turn pitch shift off here just by turning our rate, our depth, and our mix all the way down. And so now pitch shift is off. Let's go to the next module. Oh, this is actually good that I lengthen this reverb. We're going to go to the left over here and go to the Lexicon module. Again, this is a sly reference to Lexicon. And this is inspired by the 224. So there's various types of tone shaping in Liminal Space 2. The first type of tone shaping is, in the early section, right, with the FIR, the finite infinite response. What? The finite response filter that's in front of the tank. So which will darken things, right? And that was in the original kCosmos. Let's turn it all the way back up. But there's a second tone control here in Lexicon, and we can click this button to turn Lexicon on. And now we have tone controls that are like on the Lexicon 224. Now, this is not an exact model of how that unit works, but it's kind of a neat approximation. If we have a very long reverb like this, let's say we want to make a darker digital reverb tone, like you get out of a Lexicon 224, which does not have a very high frequency response. All of its reverbs are really quite dark. There's a treble control here, and you'll see right now it's just beneath Nyquist. But if I dial this down, now we will recursively, as things go through the tank, be filtering. And as a result, we're taking energy out of the tank, and we're not just darkening the reverb, but we're shortening it. So that's the first thing you can do with this. There's also a high frequency spread control. So spread actually, just like spread does in the other modules, spread makes it so that the high frequency cutoff is higher for the shorter delays and lower for the longer delays. So this gives you a little more character in the front end of the reverb, and then it darkens in the long tail. Let's move that all the way up. And we don't need our regen up so high. That's infinite. Let's just change that back lower, shall we? Did I find a bug here? This sounds like this might be running away with me. For me. From me? Here. Let's clear that out real quick. What is going on? Could be a bug. Let's see. Oh. There we go. Let's get that down to a reasonable level. Here we go. So the other controls, back to Lexicon. Okay, so the other controls, the bass T60 and the mid T60, these controls, by default, they're at infinity, which means there's no roll off in the bass or the midtones. But I can take bass way down, right? And the seconds indicator, it does not really, it's a relative measure in liminal space. It's not an absolute measure. Now we can hear that the bass tones fall away, in addition to there being roll off on the high frequencies. And so we're left with this, more mid-rangey kind of reverb. So we can dial this even further down, the treble frequency. And that's really kind of getting into that range that old digital reverbs would have. And then for the mid-range, there's a crossover control. And so that goes from 0 all the way up to just below Nyquist. And this controls the balance between the bass T60 and the mid T60. And so I'm going to set this up here, I don't know, maybe like 600. We want to set it between this value, 1800, and the very, very, 0. If I dial this back, now my mid-range tones are going to decay. and the whole thing will get shorter. Like you're saying, Keith, this is kind of complicated how this thing works. That's like how those mysterious sliders on a Lexicon work. Examine the presets for examples of this. So let's turn Lexicon off. So now we're back to, I feel like we've lost the thread with our patch. There's so much going on. Let's see. Pitch is off. True Shimmer is off. Let's just reinitialize this before we get to... Here's our default with no delay mod, no diffusion matrix, no pitch shift. Let's look at the Shimmer module. So there's a module called True Shimmer. I called it True Shimmer because you can get shimmery effects with pitch shift, and to a certain extent with delay mod. But a shimmer reverb is where we take a part of the tail and the tail of the reverb, not your tail, and we pitch shift it. And so I thought that would be a really neat addition to Liminal Space. And so in the Shimmer module, you've got an amount knob. By default, here it comes. Let's turn that up even more. So you can hear this, there's this octave that comes in. Maybe now would be the time to change our patch. Let's change our patch in multi-poly to be something, let's do liminal sharks. So again, this patch does not have reverb on in multi-poly. So there's our shimmer effect. You hear that comes in if I mute it. So that's without shimmer. Here's with shimmer. And of course you can dial this amount down. Just a touch of shimmer is kind of nice. Or we can go whole hog. Wow. Right? Now the interval on this shimmer is adjustable up and down 24 semitones. So by default it's an octave, but a seventh is kind of nice. Makes a chordal kind of effect, which may or may not work with whatever chords you're currently playing, right? Sevenths are good, 12ths are good, 19ths, right, are good. That's a very high shimmer, or we can go up to 24 semitones, which is kind of ridiculous. I mean, I think if you do that, right, you want the amount to be really low, just a tiny percentage. Very nice. Now, in addition to having the one shimmer voice, similar to popular shimmer reverbs, like what is it called? Strymon Night Sky or Strymon Big Sky? That actually has two shimmer voices. Now, instead of giving you a choral shimmer voice, I've actually given you one shimmer voice plus a unison. So there's two unison voices that can be spread around the core shimmer pitch. And you can go from, if it's 0, there's no unison voices. I feel like I'm doing a lousy job with the shimmer module. I'm sorry about that. If I move unison up, now I've got two more voices that are detuned by this amount, and the CT here means cents. So this is going to add two unison voices that are balanced around the main shimmer voice, but they're detuned. And that's a really pretty sound. Because, I love detuning at about 7 cents. And keep in mind, this is just the init patch. Like, we turned off our delay modulation and all the other crazy stuff. It's a beautiful shimmer. There is a color control that lets you go from the brightest shimmer up here to a darker shimmer. It's pretty subtle. But we don't want to knock, you know, all the life out of our shimmer, right? Around here is good. You know, don't be afraid to go negative with your intervals. So we can make a downward pitch shifted. Let's go down -12. You can hear it. And of course, in true liminal space style, there is a dedicated wavetable LFO for modulating a parameter inside of the shimmer. So we could, for example, we could change the tuning of our interval. Let's see. I'm going to put this back at like +12. Okay. So here's that sound. Oh, nice shimmer. Okay. And we're going to set the destination for this LFO to be the interval, which is the pitch of the shimmer tail. And I'll give this a little rate and a little bit of depth. Oh, what is going on? And now we are modulating the shift of the shimmering tail. And so we don't need a lot of that. We can turn this down. I think that's really cool. So we can target things like the interval. We can target the fine interval. So this will be a much subtler dynamic detuning effect. We'll turn the depth up. And you see we get the nice little reticles that show us where the modulation is going. Since there are two unison voices, there is a voice phase spread parameter, so we can knock this wavetable modulation, you know, out of phase so that we don't hear it as strongly and it becomes more of a pleasant chorusing. Very interesting effect, right? Same thing with depth. This will just change the depth of the channels. Super pretty. So you can also change, so you can change the amount, like, so we can target the amount of the shimmer. Like if we move this, you know, like this, and we change the depth, so you could see that we could oscillate between almost no shimmer and then a high amount of shimmer. This might sound really strange. Wop, 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 wop. I don't know if I've ever heard that in another shimmer. This kind of calls for a different wavetable, don't you think? I would choose like this sawtooth table. Wop, 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 wop. That's pretty interesting, right? And this wavetable goes, it becomes more exponential as you move through the wavetable. There's also a feature I haven't talked about yet. We can actually flip the vertical and horizontal orientation of the tail. So here it is going down now. Or I can essentially reverse it in time by flipping the wavetable horizontally. Weird, right? There's all sorts of like wacky things you could do. I need to program some presets that use this kind of feature. There's one more target. You can target color. That's not going to do much for you. There's a very interesting parameter called field motion. I need to change. Let's change this back to like more of a normal wavetable, shall we? And let's slow this down. Slow this down. Field motion is a special parameter that, you hear what it's doing. You can hear both pitch shifting and then something else happening. Now this gets very seasick. But basically, when we modulate field motion, we are turning the shimmer tail into basically 4 different parameters, like the left and right channels, and then the diffuse channel. So it's the channels that are, it's the sound that is common to both the left-right channels versus the diffuse parts of the tail. And there's this field route parameter. So we're currently modulating both the common and the diffuse parts of the tail, but we can all, excuse me. Oh, it's drink time. Whoa. Boy, I've been going for a long time. We can modulate like every parameter, just the common ones. So that's going to be more of a pitch shifty Doppler effect, or the diffuse parts, which don't really have pitch. It's just like this, it's just kind of this weird, subtle richness that is now moving. And I've used this in some of the presets. It's a very interesting yet subtle effect. Oh boy, how long have I been going, as I'm always saying? Oh, another 30 minutes. Oh gosh. I'm going to take a short break and then we'll try to wrap this up. I hope that you're seeing like how interesting Liminal Space 2 is. And we haven't even really explored the presets, but you can do that for yourself. Go to wavetables.lol. Get the free demo of Liminal Space 2 and like try it out for yourself. It's at Clap VST3 for Windows. All right, I'm going to take a short break and then maybe we'll wrap things up. Well, if you made it this far, you're my true audience, so like and subscribe for more talky synthesizer content if you haven't already. Had to take a little break from those bell-like sounds. I mean, you can use Liminal Space on all sorts of different things. Here's a little string chamber kind of patch. It's a little bit long, but it's very interesting. We're using some real strings here from SoundPaint Disco Strings. They're quite dry, so that's with Liminal Space bypassed, and here's with Liminal Space on. So all sorts of different things that you can do with this. The reverb really depends on the program material that you're running through it. Liminal Space lets you tune the reverb for all sorts of different applications. I don't have time to go through every single archetype and every single factory preset, but I really like Magic Swirlies. Magic Swirlies is really nice. And I need to build like some shorter patches and stuff like that. I did promise to take a look at a certain thing, which is delay mod as in a Lexicon 224. Having taken a short break from the bell-like patches, let's go back to, this really will be most audible using something bell-like. We'll select a different patch than the one that we were using before. Let's do, come on up, Multipoly. You can do it. Oh, plugin's crashed. Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Multipoly. Hopefully that's not Liminal Space that did that. Probably not. Maybe? Okay. Let's see here. Liminal. Let's get Icicles. Icicles is bell-like, but it's a little less. There we go. Nice and calm. Ooh, that sounds good with the Magic Swirlies now, doesn't it? Is this in Magic Swirlies? Yeah, it is. But we're not here to listen to Magic Swirlies. So here's the original sound. No reverb. We should probably take some of the delay off of that. Let's take the delays off of our Icicles patch here. We'll go edit. And we'll go to effects on this layer. Let's turn off the delay so we've just got the chorus. Okay, that sounds good. And then unbypass this. Okay, cool. So there is an archetype. There's 2 archetypes in here. Lexicon Mode Enhance. I'm using LXCN here so that I don't infringe any trademarks or anything. We're not trying to infringe anything. So this is an archetype that does the delay modulation in a very similar way to the Lexicon 224. So in the 224, you could through a front panel adjustment, you could introduce a certain amount of chorusing for this feature called mode enhancement. And the mode enhancement is a delay line modulation technique that, depending upon who you ask or what sources that you read, is either like low pass filtered noise or like some sort of clocked sample and hold. So I wanted to make sure that we could do that effect inside of Liminal Space. So this LXCN Mode Enhance is a starter place that that has delay mod set up in this kind of clocked sample and hold sort of way. And so I'm using the noisy wavetable that we have inside of Liminal Space. It's called noise. It starts with N, so it sorts in the right order. But what this means is noise format. This is one of my format noise wavetables. When you play this at oscillator rate, and it's not stepped, by the way, when you play this kind of thing in an oscillator, this actually sounds like it's like a vocal kind of sound that's superimposed onto noise. But it is, when we are using it as an LFO, it's essentially like a white noise source, just with like a little bit more information in it. And so to do this clocked chorusing kind of effect that you get in the Lexicon 224, gosh darn it, let's drink time. You can select a noise waveform. I'm in delay mod again. And we'll click on the shape button to make it stepped, okay? And now when we first make a wavetable LFO stepped, it'll probably look like this. Like, it'll have no slew to it, so it becomes like, it's like a sample and hold LFO, right? Now, it's just going to repeat this one frame over and over. And we could select different frames if we want to, and you'll see that they're slightly different. Then what we do is we set up our rate to be pretty slow, right? Because this has a lot of jiggity-jaggities. So this LFO is essentially moving really fast. And then we can turn its depth up, right? And what we'll hear is we'll hear this kind of chimey sound. I'm going to turn depth way up. And you can hear, especially up in the upper registers, that we're hearing a very sample and hold thing, right? We can hear that these pitches are immediately dropping down, or going up. Now that's a little too burbly, but if we change the slew rate here, so that this would be kind of the effect if we had like a true like white noise source, and then we were low pass filtering it, but also like sample and holding it so that we get these like little flat plateaus. Up here at about 40% or more is about the right range. And now we've got this chorusing coming from the delay line modulation that we can hear individual delay lines kind of snapping in and out of their different pitches. And this is very, very similar to what a 224 sounds like. It's clearly just inspired by that. It's not exact. I'm not trying to model anything exactly, but it's a really pleasing effect because it's very digital. And it's distinctly different from, say, modulating the delay taps with like a sine wave or a triangle wave. So if we dial the depth back, that's much more like the mode enhancement modes in a 224. The other finishing touch on this is you'll see that we're just scanning through this same frame of the wavetable every time. So I added this new feature called random frame. And if you click random frame, what happens is when the LFO reaches the end of its cycle, it randomly picks another frame from the wavetable and loads that in. This also makes sure that the start and the end points don't have a discontinuity. So we get this kind of smooth clocked random noise. And like, I really love that sound where you can hear the little burbling in it. We can go very subtle with it if we want to. But it's very different from with it being off. There it is off. Here it is on. Turn the delay up, or sorry, the depth up a little bit. I clicked on rate, didn't I? Well, let's try that anyway, shall we? It's fun. Too burbly. Slow it down. And of course, phase spread is making a big difference here. If we dial phase spread all the way down, they're all going to move in unison. Which is kind of its own interesting kind of springy effect, right? So turn phase spread back up, and then we could, engage depth spread a little bit to smooth this out even more. So that's a little trick I wanted to show you. I think this is a very interesting archetype. There's also the same thing, but with diffusion added from the diffusion matrix. Check this out a little bit more. And so now we have the same kind of modulation in the diffusion matrix, which is routed to both the early and the tank. This is a very rich sound. Like, who knew that this kind of sample and hold, slewed sample and hold would be such an interesting modulation source in a reverb? Not me, but now you know. Anyway, is that all I wanted to share? Oh, we need to talk about the interface a little bit. So, if you dial in a custom reverb, right? We're going to change some stuff, kind of at random. I'm going to bring this depth up. I don't know. We could introduce Derez into this too. So, like a 224, like is not sampling at the kind of rates that we can sample at today. So we could engage Derez a little bit. Well, let's dirty this up a bit with Derez. Nice. You'll see that when we've modified either an archetype or a preset from its default state, it grows a little star here, which tells us that this has changed. And so if we wanted to save this as a user preset, there is a whole user preset system in Liminal Space 2. You can access your user presets by clicking the preset button here. So this alternates between user and factory. Okay. Well, we don't have anything selected right now, but we've been messing with an archetype. So we have a change in archetype. Let's save this to our user library. That's down in utility. I will probably put a little diskette icon up there so you can access this faster, but you'll see you've got save user preset as here, and we can say this is my Derez 224 style 1, which I always do to my patches, and save that. And so now you'll see that we have a user preset. So my Derez 224. And then we can recall that, right? So there's kind of a gated drum sound, and then here's, where is it? My Derez 224. Now, of course, you don't have to save your presets. They will be, the state of Liminal Space will be saved with your project. I mean, unless you're in the demo. But anyway, there's a full real user preset section now. Other things in utility that you have here, you can change the UI scale. I zoomed out the UI scale a little bit. It's reported down here. I'm at 1.9x UI. It is high DPI aware. Bitwig respects that. Other hosts respect high DPI mode as well. You may have to change the scale depending upon your eyesight and your screen resolution. You can do that here. You can make the scale smaller. And of course, when we do that, the button sort of jumps. But we could make the scale smaller. This is now too small for me to see. So I would bump my UI scale back up. Let's see, UI scale 1.9. Yeah, I like that. And you can independently scale the text. So if we want the text to be bigger, I can click here and I can make all the text bigger, but the general UI scale hasn't changed. We can change the scale back to the default, text scale back to the default. So this is our default state. What else? Oh, gosh, the most important thing. The original, whoops, not that, I want to go back to Phosphor. The original version of Liminal Space looked like this. You're like, Keith, how is this different? Well, there's a phosphor glow now. And this is purely a user preference. So off looks like this. If we turn this on, we have a subtle glow to everything. Because I wanted this to be like, using an old Apple II or, a Fairlight interface, right? I know some people don't like green. We'll get there. There's also a strong mode for the phosphor glow. So we've got off, we've got subtle, and we've got strong, depending upon how crazy you want things to look. I like the subtle mode. There are different themes with different colors. So like if you don't like green, there's a phosphor amber that I think looks very nice. There's ice, which is pretty cool. Well, the ice blue, not ice, baby. There's a white on black. I kind of like blue screen to death. That's pretty nice too. Or you can customize things. So you can just select any color from this color picker if you want to, and this is saved in your preferences file. Like maybe I want, an amber that's more like this, a little more reddish, and I can change the background if I want to. You can make really ugly things. Don't blame me. You can make ugly things if you want to. So you could make it completely black, or you can make it just, a little bit black. Maybe a cool black. Anyway, so you've got that to play with. What else? You can technically import presets from Liminal Space 1. They will sound different, and the main thing... Boy, I don't like that color. This is orange and black. This is like the SF Giants. What was I saying? Oh, you can import legacy presets from Liminal Space 1. They won't sound the same, but if you've saved presets previously, you can click this import button and you can navigate to them and you can import them. The main change you're going to have to make probably will be in delay mod, because delay mod had very limited effect before. And what's probably going to happen is you may have set the depth way up, because that was the only way that you could really hear anything going on with it. So you'll probably just need to drag your depths down. Other things will translate okay, but give it a shot if you want to. Let's change this back to my phosphor. I like my phosphor green. Anyway, I think that's it. Go get Liminal Space. Again, there's a demo that's pretty unrestricted. It's free at wavetables.lol. There'll be links in the description. The full version is just $10. It is a free upgrade if you already own Liminal Space. Please go check it out and have fun. I'm going to do more videos about Liminal Space, because obviously there's a lot of different techniques to talk about. But it is super fun to browse the factory presets and just see what you can get. Like Derez wash. That is so nice. It's just great. It's a super fun reverb for ambient, for fucking shit up, for liminal kinds of genres. And I will be authoring some shorter presets and stuff, because it's also really good at that kind of stuff. There are some drum presets and stuff in here already. Anyway, shut up, Keith. That's it. That's all for today. Be good to each other. Have fun making music. And I will talk to you later.